be so bad either. Not paying our debts wouldn't be so bad. I don't know what planet we're living on. This country needs pro-growth economic policies. We need to take actions. And the first action we should take is to vote down this Transparency Act. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate it.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
And, Madam Speaker, just as we recognize that the American taxpayer has already been squeezed by such expenditures of $527 million by the failed loans to Solyndra, we recognize that they must find these to be put on the record so we understand what they truly cost. And the gentleman who has been a leader in this regard from the very beginning of time in Congress, the leader in the area of budget transparency and fixing the American budget here in Congress, is the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensley. And I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding. I appreciate his leadership, and certainly his leadership is one of the foremost budget hawks in the entire United States Congress. Madam Chair, we just learned that the President will not be a day late and a dollar short with his budget. Instead, he will be a week late and $1 trillion short on his budget. We also learned from the Congressional Budget Office this will not be his first year, his second year, his third year, but his fourth year to be $1 trillion short on his budget. Now, Madam Chair, we received a little good news last month. 200,000 of our fellow citizens were able to find work. Unfortunately, 13 million, almost 13 million, remain unemployed. More people on food stamps than ever before. Half of all Americans are either low income or in poverty under the policies of this president. It is clear that this president's policies have failed. They have made our economy worse. And because he cannot run on his record, he has regrettably turned to the politics of division and envy. To help the economy, to help create more jobs, Madam Chair, number one, we've got to quit spending money we don't have. And second of all, the American people, job creators, have to be able to know that they have a fact-based budget, one that is honest as the American people themselves. We need fair value accounting. You know, if you're a small business in the 5th District of Texas and you don't have fair value accounting, you probably go broke. Well, the federal government doesn't use fair value accounting, and guess what? The federal government is broke. That's why we must pass the gentleman from New Jersey's bill, the Budget Accounting Transparency Act. No more Fannie and Freddies, no more Solyndras. Let's ensure that we account for these costs. It's part of the Republican plan for America's job creators to give our job creators the confidence they need to hire and grow this economy.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's unfortunate that some of our Republican colleagues can't take just a moment away from politics to celebrate the fact that we did have some good economic news over the last month, over 250,000 private sector jobs created. That's good news. Is it enough? Of course not. Of course we need to do more, which is why we'd like to see our Republican colleagues bring the President's jobs bill to the floor of the House. It's still sitting somewhere around here that includes a proposal to invest in our infrastructure, in our roads, in our bridges, and broadband, so that we can make sure that we have an economy that can compete and win with respect to our global competitors. So it would be great if we could take up that bill. In the past, investment in infrastructure has always been a bipartisan initiative, but the President's proposal is still languishing. With that, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Wisconsin, a member of the Budget Committee, Ms. Moore.
Well, thank you so much.
The lady from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to join my fellow Democratic members of the House Budget Committee to express my confusion and disbelief over our colleagues' decision to make a spectacle out of these so-called budget process reform bills rather than using our time to wisely address serious economic policy and make long-term overdue process improvements. I admire my Republican colleagues for raising the issue of the need to have a better budgeting process, but these are just spectacles. This so-called Budget and Accounting Transparency Act is an example of that. H.R. 3581 would change the way we budget for government loans by requiring estimates for these loans, example, student loans and energy loans, housing, small business loans, be done on a so-called fair value basis. These estimates account for so-called market-based risk. Now, experts argue that so-called fair value estimates overstate the true cost of government credit programs because the estimates include a risk premium that never materializes in the government's cash flow. It's also critical to note that in every single discussion of H.R. 3581 and fair value estimates, that if we applied this policy not just to credit products, but government-wide, like to Medicare or to ag programs or some of the other favorite programs of the majority, it would increase estimated subsidy costs for the government for all loan programs by more than $50 billion. But you know what? That may, in fact, be consistent with what the authors and proponents of this bill want to see. We heard, Madam Speaker, our good friend, Mr. Garrett, start his opening speech with how the country is broke. We heard Mr. Hensarling talk about the food stamp president. Will you yield another minute? I got to talk about the food stamp president a little bit.
Gentlelady recognized for one additional
how,
minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. How we ought to stop spending. Well, this, in fact, accomplishes that purpose by overstating the budget risk, the accounting risk that's already accounted for in the Credit Reform Act of 1990. By overstating the cost of these programs, it, in effect, reduces the base for our budgets. And if that is their mission, it will be accomplished with passages of these bills. It doesn't make any sense, Madam Speaker, to try to put Freddie and Fannie on budget when right now in the Financial Services Committee, on which some of these members sit, we are trying to make a major overhaul of Freddie and Fannie, and their fate has not been determined yet. The OMB, the CBO, both of the instruments and institutions that we rely upon for budgeting are not prepared to bring this online. This is not ready for prime time, and I would urge the body to reject these proposals that have not been vetted.
Gentlelady's time's expired.
And I
the
yield
gentleman
back.
from New Jersey.
And I thank the lady for commending us for raising these issues. But actually, we're doing something more than just simply raising the issue. We're addressing it and solving this problem as well. And I appreciate the fact that the gentlelady raises the fact about a list of experts who have questions about this. Well, I have experts too, but I actually have the name of former CBO Director Doug Holtz-Aiken, now with American Action Forum, writes us here to express support of H.R. 3581. And the gentlelady may also know, since she serves on the committee when it comes to this issue, that we had this issue up in committee recently, and we asked the current CBO director, does he support the with regard to moving towards fair value, and he said that is the more appropriate basis of evaluating the obligations of the federal government. So we have the experts, and I would like to, without objection, put the letter of January 30th from American Action Forum into the record.
The gentleman's request will be covered under general leave.
And with that, I yield now 1 minute to the gentleman from California.
Gentleman from California, recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, a family that excludes from its family budget the mortgage payments it knows it must make is diluting itself and it's sabotaging its finances. That's precisely what the federal government is doing right now with respect to billions of dollars of liabilities that arise from its ill-fated sponsorship of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. This bill takes a small step toward restoring honest and accurate accounting to our government's finances by requiring that the enormous liabilities incurred by Fannie and Freddie be accounted for in the federal budget process using exactly the same accounting standards for loans that we already insist upon with mortgage lenders. I wish this bill abolished Fannie and Freddie outright. I wish it restored the days when banks or borrowers who made bad decisions took responsibility for them and didn't demand that their neighbors pay for their mistakes. But can't we at least agree that the public has a right to expect that the costs of this folly are honestly accounted for in our nation's budget? I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Maryland.
I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey.
And with that, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Oklahoma. Or actually, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Gentleman from Oklahoma recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, sir, very much. Madam Speaker, I'm grateful that we're getting a chance to shine some light into the area of the credit costs and the credit issues. If you went to any bank in America, any community bank, any other bank you want to go to and talk to them about fair value, they would know exactly what we're talking about because we as the federal government require that of them. Now, this is another one of those instances that the federal government has exempted themselves from the rules that everyone else has to live under. Fair value is not some radical different proposal. It takes into effect the real risks that are sitting out there on the horizon and said those need to be taken into account. It's what we evaluate every single bank on dealing with their safety and soundness. This bill addresses 3 real issues. Let me try to address those 3. The real costs, that's number 1. The real cost in Washington is incredibly difficult to find nowadays. You have all these different estimates, all these things that move around. If we want to know what is the real cost with the risks involved, this is the only way to be able to get it, is in this fair value estimate. Second real. The real issue in the past couple of years is Fannie and Freddie. We all know it. We're all aware of it. And for the first time, we're getting to the real issue and starting to deal with how do we handle Fannie and Freddie, where do we go from here? So we're getting the real cost, we're beginning to deal with the real issue, which is Fannie and Freddie, and finally, we're finally getting real transparency. We should let every American see what's in our budget and how we're handling it and the costs that are out there. This puts it online and gets out there for every single American to be able to take a look at it and say, okay, what are the proposals, what is out there, what's the real cost, how are we going to handle this in real ways, and how do we get real transparencies? With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, if this legislation only dealt with Fannie and Freddie, that's something that I certainly would support. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office already puts Fannie and Freddie online. I know it's an easy catchphrase, but the reality is, behind the discussion of Fannie and Freddie is a whole other discussion about whether we want to apply these rules to things like student loans. And the reality is that if you apply this methodology to student loans, you will systematically overestimate the cost in the budget in terms of outlays. I would just like, Madam Chair, to refer the body to a report that was written by 2 of the prime advocates for this. It's called Reforming Credit Reform. Deborah Lucas was one of the co-authors. This was in Public Budgeting and Finance, winter of 2008. And just let me read a portion, because it says, including a risk premium in subsidy cost produces a cost estimate that on average exceeds outlays for realized losses. That discrepancy between cash flows and subsidy costs must be reconciled in the budget so that over the life of a credit cohort, actual cash flows match budget costs in expectation. Now, as I said, this is a complicated issue, and that sounds like a lot of complicated budgety gobbledygook. Bottom line is what this bill does is systematically overestimate the costs in the budget on a cash flow basis. And it's important that everybody understand this. Right now, when the federal government budgets for credit risk, we take into account the default rate. In other words, whether it's student loans, whether it's clean energy loans, whether it's Fannie and Freddie, people make an assessment about what the likely default rate is, and that is taken into account and then discounted present value when you put together your budget. Now, even the advocates of this legislation concede that. That's not a question. We already do that. And even the advocates of this legislation concede that it will, again, systematically, in the budget, have a higher cost number associated with outlays than reality will dictate. What do I mean by that? It will say that student loans are actually more expensive on a cash basis than they really are. Let me repeat that. If you direct that the Congressional Budget Office move to this kind of accounting, the numbers that will appear in the budget on a cash basis will systematically exaggerate, inflate the costs of a credit program. What that means is that if you're members of Congress and you're looking at a proposed student loan program and you're looking at the numbers that are forecast, you're going to think that it's more expensive in cash terms to the taxpayer than it really is, on average, over time. And therefore, you're going to be less likely to make that investment potentially. So I think it's important as we look at this that we recognize that in place of something that, as I said, the former head of CBO, Bob Reischauer, has said provides an accurate picture of the cost on a cash basis, to replace that with something that systematically gives us a different picture and one that systematically exaggerates the cost would be a mistake. And again, I just end this portion here by saying we just don't think this is ready for prime time. We don't think that we've fully understood all the impacts. There are experts on both sides of this issue. But it seems to me the Budget Committee could at least devote one hearing to this general topic. Again, we had one hearing on applying this to FHA. If you want to apply it to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, CBO already does that. No problem. But this leaps from that to applying it throughout the budget, including student loan programs. And I don't think we've begun to understand what impact that would have on the affordability of going to college and the other impacts throughout the budget. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from New Jersey.
And Madam Chairman, the gentleman, Maryland, speaks of the report of Marvin Faup from 08, I guess that was, and also speaks in reference to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. In front of me, and I'll ask under general leave to enter this into record as well, just recently, just this week, I guess, he has now issued the final report, and this report says as follows. This comment responds to a recent release from the, as the gentleman was referring to, from the Center on Budget Policy Priorities, CPPB. And what does he say? My view is that the CPP misrepresents our work that you were referring to. They misrepresent his work and more fundamentally incorrectly characterizes the purpose and consequences of moving to a fair value approach to credit valuation in the budget. One of his main points is the legislation before us would do what? It would remove phantom gains to the government from budgetary treatment of direct lending and loan guarantee programs. These illusory gains mislead public policymakers about the cost of their policy decisions. What does that mean? What that means is in the numbers that the gentleman from Maryland was talking about, that we're actually making more and over time exceeds outlay. Marvin Faup is here saying, no, just the opposite, that this bill would address that. It would remove those gains and show it for the reality of what it is. And with that, I'd like to yield 2 minutes now to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Hulskamp.
Gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise in support of H.R. 3581, the Budget and Accounting Transparency Act. The first step in treating an addiction is admitting you have a problem. An addict has to be honest with himself before he can overcome his dependence. In that same vein, Washington needs to be honest about his addiction to overspending, and this bill will force Washington to do just that. It will force Washington to be honest not only with itself, but more importantly, with the American people. By bringing Fannie and Freddie on budget, Washington will be honest that these expensive programs have become the financial responsibility of the federal government. By requiring risk to be assessed and accounted for in loans or loan guarantees, Washington will be honest about the gains or losses taxpayers can anticipate. And by requiring every agency to post their budget request online, Washington will have to be honest with the American taxpayers about where their money goes. A lot of honesty is needed now, Madam Speaker, but a little bit will go a long way in restoring the trust of the American people and the fiscal discipline of Washington. Can we restore the trust of the American people? Yes, we can. Can we restore fiscal discipline in Washington? Yes, we can. Yes, we will with passage of this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Back, gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just actually reading from the original document, Reforming Credit Reform by Marvin Pope and Deborah Lucas, where they say straight out here that including a risk premium and subsidy cost produces a cost estimate that on average exceeds outlays for realized losses. Now, we can argue whether that's an appropriate methodology or not, but the reality is it will, as a budgetary matter, systematically inflate the cash outlays for different credit programs going forward. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from New Jersey.
I don't believe we have any other speakers. Then
I'd be happy to.
Okay, have to close then.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I wish we were here debating the President's jobs plan. I wish we were focused on bringing to the floor the conference committee report so that we could provide relief to 160 million Americans through the payroll tax cut. With respect to the budget bill before us, as I indicated, it's just not ready for prime time. You would think that before undertaking a change which seems small, is very complicated, and could have lots of unintended consequences, especially with respect to things like student loans. As I've said, if we were confining this debate and this bill to things like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I have no problem. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office already applies this methodology to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. But the scope of this is much, much broader than that. It goes, as I said, to all credit programs, including student loan programs, and will, as a matter of accounting, show in the budget greater dollar outlays than will actually reflect the ongoing costs of things like student loans, again, in a systematic way. The last point I want to make, Madam Chair, is one that was raised by one of my colleagues, which is, where do you actually draw the line when it comes to moving in direction of this other kind of accounting? Now, this bill applies to all credit programs, but there are other programs funded by the federal government where the costs rise and fall based on what's happening in the market, based on what's happening in the economy. There are lots of ag programs that rise and fall based on what's happening in the economy. Medicaid is a program whose costs rise and fall based on the economy. And in talking to lots of people, it's not clear where you draw a bright line. And I certainly don't know where the argument ends with respect to moving toward this kind of accounting. And before we begin to move even further in this direction, I think we should have a debate on what exactly that would mean for our budget and for the American people. So, again, I commend the gentleman for raising an issue, especially as it's been in the context of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I think this deserves a lot more attention before you expand it throughout all the credit programs of the United States government. I'm particularly concerned of the impact it would have on the affordability of going to college and student loans. And then, as I said, there's no clear demarcation between the credit programs and the argument that's being applied here into some of the other programs where the risk to the taxpayer also fluctuates based on market risk and the performance of the economy. So, Madam Chair, I would urge my colleagues to oppose this legislation.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman yield back the balance of his time.
And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey.
And again, I'll say to the gentleman as well, as your colleague did as well, commended us for raising this important issue. And I do agree that it is an important issue. But I think the American public is tired of Washington simply raising important issues and discussing important issues and having committee hearings on important issues. I think the American public is looking for Washington once and for all to take some decisive action in the name of the American public, in the name of the hard-working taxpayers whose money it is that is on the line. It is the people's money that we are talking about in all of these bills. It is the people's money that has been put on the line when the federal government issues loans and loan guarantees. I want to remind the gentleman from Maryland of how much money we've been talking about in all these things. When we talk about all the bailouts that the American public stood and railed against, rightfully so, as did I, whether it was the oil bailouts or the bank bailouts or the Wall Street bailouts, they all pale in comparison to the bailouts that we're talking about here with the GSEs, $186 billion and counting. The gentleman, Mr. Ryan, raised the issue before that I believe that was going to go up to $290 billion and counting. That's not Washington's money or the government's money or the gentleman from Maryland's money. That's the hard-working American taxpayers' money that was initially put at risk without any idea what the real risk was going to be for all these other loan programs, and now is going out as outlays. And now is going out without any prospect whatsoever of ever being repaid. Now, the gentleman says, well, these estimates of fair value accounting may exceed outlays. Well, they exceed it until they don't. They exceed it until the loan fails. They exceed it until you're talking about a Solyndra situation where you guarantee up to over $500 million and then the company goes bust. And that's what we're trying to address here, to make sure that you're actually properly grading and accounting for this. We're not asking for something extraordinary. I know the gentleman from New Jersey came to the floor and said, this is extreme, what we're asking for here. Extreme? Well, why do we ask the private sector to use the same sort of accounting? Why do we ask the mom-and-pop shops, the big Wall Street firms, and everything but in between to use this sort of accounting when they do so? Why do we ask your local bank, when you go in there and ask for a student, when you ask for a student loan, a car loan, a house loan, whatever, we ask those banks to use this same form of accounting. Well, if it's good enough for the rest of society, if it's good enough for all of my constituents and your constituents, if it's good enough for all the businesses back at home, my gosh, I think it's good enough for the federal government to play by the same rules. And that's all we're asking for here. He says, how far should we go? I think we should go as far as to say that the federal government should have to do the exact same thing, play by the exact same rules that our businesses back at home have to do. And that's all this bill does. It shines the light of day on what we're spending. And if we're spending too much, then we have to do what we're elected to do. Set priorities. Decide where we want to spend it on this program or that program, or maybe cut back in this program and expand someplace else. But we can't make those decisions until we actually have the information before us. We can't say this one is working and this one is not working, this one is worthwhile and this one's not worthwhile until we actually have that information before us. And that's the long and short of it. That's all this bill does. It gives us, both sides of the aisle, the American public, that information. And with that, I would call for support of this legislation of sunshine and accountability and transparency in the way the federal government runs their business. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and all time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Budget, printed in the bill, it shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee, print 112-13. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered read. All points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute are waived. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in House Report 112-388. Each such amendment may be offered only in the report, printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and the opponent, shall not be subject to an amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The Chair understands that the amendment number one amendment will not be offered. It is now in order to consider amendment number 2, printed in House Report 112-388. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in House Report number 112-388, offered by Mr. Dole of Illinois.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Pursuant to House Resolution 539, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dole, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. This is a bipartisan amendment, one that my colleague from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, and I believe strongly about. And as part of this Congress' effort to increase transparency and promote sound accounting practices in the federal government, this amendment would reform accounting practices at the Office of Management and Budget. Specifically, it would require the OMB director to prepare all budgets submitted to the President to use accrual-based accounting standards in addition to the currently used cash-basis GAAP accounting standards. Americans have a right to expect accountability, honesty, and transparency from their government. And right now, the mistrust of Congress, I believe, is at an all-time high. The use of the accrual-based accounting at the Office of Management and Budget would provide a more accurate reflection of our nation's true fiscal state. For too long, the federal government has relied on unsound budgeting practices that understate the reality and distort important costs and liabilities held by the government. As a small business owner, I know essentially how honest accounting is critical to financial decision-making. And in that respect, we should strive to make the federal government's practices more like what we demand of the private sector. In fact, the government itself, Madam Chairman, demands that publicly traded companies use the accrual-based accounting method, because the accrual-based accounting method gives a more accurate depiction of the true liabilities that are out there. In the cash basis, you're able to distort reality and be able to manipulate things to make them look a little bit rosier. The American people are looking for a fact-based budget, and they deserve no less. They deserve to know the truth about what our true liabilities are. And the truth is that the current practice of using only cash-basis accounting at the Office of Management and Budget paints an incomplete picture of our nation's future long-term liabilities. For example, the promise of Social Security and Medicare only show up as the cost to the American taxpayer when money is actually paid out. Accrual accounting is more accurately reflects our nation's obligations so that a promise today is immediately recognized and accounted for, whether or not any money has been dispersed at that point in time. Madam Chairman, I am confident that the House Budget Committee recognizes the importance of honest accounting practices that accurately reflect the true fiscal state of this country. As a small business owner, I understand that it is absolutely critical when making decisions that impact not only the business, but the people that I work with, that we have a more accurate reflection of our liabilities. The government should be no different. And with that, I'd like to yield, if I may, to Mr. Garrett from New Jersey just for a few moments.
Sure.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Yes. First of all, let me just begin by saying I appreciate the gentleman's effort with regard to this legislation. Appreciate also the bipartisan nature and intentions behind the amendment as well. There are unquestionably circumstances where accrual accounting is the best way, the most appropriate way to display the federal government's budgetary costs and obligation. Now, as you know, the underlying bill does focus on one such area where accrual accounting has long been in use. And what it does then is to try to build upon that years of experience and to try to study the application of that as applied to federal credit programs. The underlying bill also, I should say as an aside, also includes a study of another area, because I know there's a question about how far are we going in these things, another area where whether it might be appropriate to extend this. This is with regard to the federal insurance programs. Why is that? Well, it's because we don't have as many studies on that. And I might just add to the point of the gentleman from Maryland before, there have been a number of references on the area that we're looking to. CBO has done with regard to student loans, with regard to housing, with regard to SBA and energy. CBO has issued a number of reports where fair value accounting were included, and that's why we included it in this bill. But again, I appreciate the gentleman's work in this legislation. On the amendment, I oppose it as it stands now, however.
If I can, that the chairman the chairman would work with me to try to make sure that we have a fact-based, more accurate and honest accounting, I would be happy to withdraw the amendment.
Not only will I work with you, I believe that the chairman of the full committee will be intentioning to work with you on this as well. The goal is the same by all of us here, and I think by the other side as well, is to try to get as much information that is appropriately, that is able to get out to come out, and we'll be glad to work with you on this.
With that, Madam Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to withdraw my amendment, my bipartisan amendment, in hopes that we can have some more accurate accounting in the future.
Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 3, printed in House Report 112-388. For what purposes does the gentleman from New York rise?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
And the clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 3, printed in House Report Number 112-388, offered by Mr. Tonko of New York.
Pursuant to House Resolution 539, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today to offer an amendment to H.R. 3581, the Budget Accounting and Transparency Act. My amendment restores a critical step that was skipped by my Republican colleagues. You see, we never once had a hearing in the Budget Committee devoted specifically to exploring the main proposal contained in this bill, the use of fair value estimates to determine the cost of federal loans. If I could change that, I would, but my Republican colleagues have pushed this bill to the floor. When so many at home look at Congress and shake their heads at the political gamesmanship that has come to dominate this institution, my amendment simply asks that we take a moment to be objectively smart rather than just politically savvy about a policy decision with major repercussions. If this legislation took effect this year, CBO estimated that we would see the federal deficit jump by $55 billion. This is a bill that would impact things like housing loans, student loans, small business loans, and even our mortgage guarantee programs for vets. It would create the appearance that these loans and loan guarantees cost more with an accounting method that is relatively new and certainly under debate. For a bill with transparency in its title, we're talking about using some pretty murky math. My Republican colleagues will say that we need CBO estimates on loans to reflect the risk involved in federal lending. That makes sense, which is why we already do it. The approach under current law already reflects the risks that borrowers will default on their loans or guarantees. The real difference here is whether we think estimates of federal loans should be based on how the government borrows and lends, or alternately, on how the private sector borrows and lends. I understand my colleagues have a great esteem for private sector business practices, and as a former small business owner myself, I share that admiration. But we have to understand that the federal government of the most powerful country on earth isn't a private actor. No private lender is in the same position as the federal government, with its ability to borrow at Treasury rates and its ability to spread risk across such a broad portfolio. So understandably, there is significant debate as to whether and how fair value estimates could be applied to government loans. The bottom line is that it would involve a lot of guesswork. At a time when our housing market has been devastated, when our workforce is struggling to attain the knowledge and skill set they need in a difficult job market, when small businesses are fighting their way out of the worst recession since our Great Depression, and when our vets are facing a higher jobless rate than the rest of the country, why on earth would we make a change of this magnitude without consulting with the best budget and accounting minds in our country? The impact of this legislation is too big to be treated more like an election year talking point than a major policy change, with very real impacts on people that we here represent. That is why I am offering this modest proposal. My amendment simply promises or proposes rather, that we convene a commission of budget and accounting experts to provide recommendations to Congress regarding the best measures to accurately account for the cost of federal credit programs. Congress will then have the opportunity to vote on the Commission's recommendations, and if changes are deemed wise, we can move forward with the smartest course of action and a policy that brings our federal loan and loan guarantee estimates into uniformity. After all, as we heard on this very floor, it's the people's money we're dealing with. I urge my colleagues to look before we jump on this one, and I urge you to support my amendment. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from New Jersey.
As I rise in opposition to the amendment that's before us, in essence, the amendment has the effect, as so many amendments often do that come to the floor, basically gutting the entire bill. Now, the core reform made by this bill is to do what? Is to adopt for all federal credit programs fair value accounting. Now, this is not a precipitous or rash decision that we're being made here. The Budget Committee, both under Republican and Democrat leadership, has over time studied and worked on the implications of moving to a fair value accounting for federal credit programs. The CBO, we reference all the time as an independent arbiter of what is right here and study these things. And other academics have conducted studies going back as far as the 1990s, if not earlier, on this question as well. In fact, there was talk of a commission on the proponent of this legislation amendment. There was a commission featuring 36 experts, including 6 former CBO directors. What did they recommend? They recommended moving to a fair value accounting in 2010. Indeed, it was back in 2009 that this House, under Democrat leadership, voted to require the use of fair value accounting with respect to U.S. commitments made to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Additionally, the CBO has conducted analysis of dozens of federal credit programs on a fair value basis. So this bill is not precipitous, this bill is not rash, this bill is not extreme. This bill takes a cautious approach and applies fair value budgeting in those areas where we have the most experience, while calling for a further study of those areas that it makes sense to do study, federal insurance programs. So I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment and support the judicious and experience-based approach of the underlying bill.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York, and those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs? Yes.
I ask for a recorded vote.
In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. A recorded vote is requested. Those in favor of taking this vote by a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
The House this afternoon has been debating a bill that would change the way federal loans are calculated, change another bill that they've offered, the Republicans have offered in changing the federal budget process. It's a bill that would also require that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac be included in the federal budget. They've also considered 3 Democratic amendments, this one by Paul Tonko of New York, which would create a 6-member commission to recommend how to most accurately account for the costs of federal credit programs. It's a 15-minute vote. This is an amendment vote, the only amendment vote on a bill, only amendment recorded vote on a bill that would change the federal budgeting process, changing the way federal loans are calculated, and also requiring that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac be included in the federal budget. This is the Tonko amendment. It is a 15-minute vote. We expect a Democratic motion to recommit and final passage on the way, and that should be it for recorded votes this afternoon in the House. Today, President Obama hosted a second White House Science Fair, and he announced today that he's going to request in his upcoming budget $80 million from Congress for a new Education Department competition to support math and science teachers. During the remainder of this vote, we're going to show you the President's comments from earlier today.
Well, welcome to the White House Science Fair. It is... I just spent some time checking out some of the projects that were brought here today, and I've got to say, this is fun. It's not every day that you have robots running all over your house. I am trying to figure out how you got through the metal detectors. I also shot a marshmallow through an air gun, which was very exciting. Science is what got several of our guests where they are today, so I just want to make a couple of introductions. We've got a real-life astronaut and the head of NASA, Charles Bolden, in the house. We have the administrator of the EPA, Lisa Jackson, is here. The director of the National Science Foundation, Subra Suresh, is here. My science advisor, there's Subra over here. My science advisor, John Holdren, is in the house. We got a couple of people who've dedicated themselves to making science cool for young people. We've got Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye, the science guy. So, now, it is fitting that this year's fair is happening just 2 days after the Super Bowl. I want to congratulate the New York Giants and all their fans. I just talked to Coach Coughlin. I'm looking forward to having the Giants here at the White House so we can celebrate their achievements. But what I've also said, I've said this many times, is if we are recognizing athletic achievement, then we should also be recognizing academic achievement and science achievement. If we invite the team that wins the Super Bowl to the White House, then we need to invite some science fair winners to the White House as well. And now I'm going to talk about how great all of you are in a second. But before I do, I want to give the parents a big round of applause because they work hard to help you succeed. And I know this is their day. They're really proud of you. As a parent, I know that seeing your kids do extraordinary things brings the greatest happiness that a parent can have. So, so congratulations to all the parents of all these incredible young people. But parents aren't the only ones who helped you get this far. Every one of you can think of a teacher or maybe a couple of teachers without whom you would not be here. So I want you to promise that the next time you see those teachers, that you give them a big thank you, not just for yourselves, but also for me, because teachers matter. They deserve our support. And I want to make sure that we are constantly lifting up how important teachers are to making sure that not only you succeed, but this country succeeds. So give teachers a big round of applause. Now, as I was walking around the science fair, I was thinking back to when I was your age, and basically you guys put me to shame. What impresses me so much is not just how smart you are, but it's the fact that you recognize you've got a responsibility to use your talents in service of something bigger than yourselves. You know, some of you that means developing new products that will change the way we live. So Haley Hoveter, where's Haley? There she is, right over here. Invented a new type of sugar packet that dissolves in hot water. It's flavorless, it's colorless, and potentially could save up to 2 million pounds of trash each year, and that's just at Starbucks. So MasterCard has already awarded her $10,000 to help turn her idea into a business. Some of you are here because you saw a problem in your community and you're trying to do something to solve it. Benjamin Hylack, where's Benjamin? There's Benjamin right here. Was worried that folks at his grandmother's senior center were getting lonely. So he built a robot with a monitor and a video camera. So it's like a moving Skype. And it moves around the center and allows seniors to talk to their kids and their grandkids even when they can't visit in person. So inventions like Benjamin's could make life better for millions of families. For some of you, the journey you took to get here is just as inspiring as the work that you brought with you today. There's a rocketry team from Presidio, Texas. Where's my team here? Where are you? Stand up, guys. Stand up. This is part of the 4th poorest school district in the state of Texas. And I was told that teachers cooked food to sell after church. Supporters drove 200 miles to pick up donuts for bake sales. They even raffled off a goat. Is that right? They even raffled off a goat. Is that right? Just so they could raise enough money for the rocketry team to compete. And the majority of the kids at the school are ESL, English as a second language. And the presentation they made could not make you prouder. So way to go. There's a group of young engineers from Paul Robeson Malcolm X Academy, and nobody needs to tell them the kinds of challenges that Detroit still faces. Where's my team from Detroit in the house? There they are. Stand up. They believe in their city, and they're coming up with new ideas to keep Detroit's comeback going. And there's Samantha Garvey. Where's Samantha? Just saw Samantha. There she is. Stand up, Samantha. Samantha spent years studying mussel populations in the Long Island Sound. And when she learned that she was a semifinalist for the Intel Science Talent Search, when she found this out, her family was living in a homeless shelter. So think about what she's overcome. She wants to, by the way, work maybe for NOAA or EPA. So this is Dr. Lipchenko. She's the head of NOAA. Lisa Jackson, right there, head of EPA. You might just want to, you know, hook up with them before you leave. The young people I met today, the young people behind me, you guys inspire me. It's young people like you that make me so confident that America's best days are still to come. When you work and study and excel at what you're doing in math and science, when you compete in something like this, you're not just trying to win a prize today, you're getting America in shape to win the future. You're making sure we have the best, smartest, most skilled workers in the world so that the jobs and industries tomorrow take root right here. You're making sure we'll always be home to the most creative entrepreneurs, the most advanced science labs and universities. You're making sure America will win the race to the future. So as an American, I'm proud of you. As your president, I think we need to make sure your success stories are happening all across the country. And that's why when I took office, I called for an all-hands-on-deck approach to science, math, technology, and engineering. Let's train more teachers. Let's get more kids studying these subjects. Let's make sure these fields get the respect and attention that they deserve. But it's not just a government effort. I'm happy to say that the private sector has answered that call as well. They understand how important it is to their future. So today, led by the Carnegie Corporation, a group of businesses and foundations is announcing a $22 million fund to help train 100,000 new science and math teachers. A coalition of more than 100 CEOs is expanding innovative math and science programs to 130 sites across the country. And other companies are partnering from everybody from Will.i.am to Dean Kamen to make sure we celebrate young scientists and inventors and engineers, not just at the White House, but in every city, in every town, all across America. And many of these leaders are here today, and I want to thank them for doing their part. We're going to do everything we can to partner you to help you succeed in your projects. And I'm proud to announce that the budget I unveil next week will include programs to help prepare new math and science teachers and to meet an ambitious goal, which is 1 million more American graduates in science, technology, engineering, and math over the next 10 years. That is a goal we can achieve. That's a goal we can achieve. Now, in a lot of ways, today is a celebration of the new, but the belief that we belong on the cutting edge of innovation, that's an idea as old as America itself. I mean, we're a nation of tinkerers and dreamers and believers in a better tomorrow. You think about our founding fathers. They were all out there doing experiments. And, folks like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, they were constantly curious about the world around them and trying to figure out how can we help shape that environment so that people's lives are better. It's in our DNA. We know that innovation has helped each generation pass down that basic American promise, which is no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, you can make it if you try. So there's nothing more important than keeping that promise alive for the next generation. There's no priority I have that's higher than as president than this. And I can't think of a better way to spend a morning than with the young people who are here doing their part and creating some unbelievable stuff in the process. So I'm proud of you. I want you to keep up your good work. I'm going to make a special plea to the press, not just the folks who are here, but also your editors. Give this some attention. I mean, this is the kind of stuff, what these young people are doing, that's going to make a bigger difference in the life of our country over the long term than just about anything. And, it doesn't belong just on the, back pages of a newspaper. We've got to lift this up. We've got to emphasize how important this is and recognize these incredible young people who are doing things that I couldn't even imagine thinking about at 5th grade or 8th grade or in high school. And so pay attention to this. This is important. This is what's going to make a difference in this country over the long haul. This is what inspires me and gets me up every day. This is what we should be focusing on in our public debates. And as for all the folks who are here, don't let your robots wander off anywhere. All right? So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Congratulations. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats until the President and the student exhibitors have exited the room.
Good job, everybody.
President Obama speaking to high school students at the science fair at the White House and also unveiling a $80 million plan to train 100,000 new teachers in math and science over the next decade. Back on the House floor, this is an amendment by Paul Tonko of New York on a bill that would change the federal budgeting process, one of a series of bills that House Republicans are proposing. This one would alter the way the costs of federal loans are calculated, and it would also require the budgets of mortgage providers Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to be considered in the annual federal budget. The amendment would create a 6-member commission to recommend how to most accurately account for the value and market-based risk estimates and Treasury discount rates. This has been a 15-minute vote. We expect a Democratic motion to recommit and final passage vote ahead. Earlier today, the House passed by a vote of 259 to 164 a bill that creates a commission for recommending federal properties that could be sold or redeveloped to reduce costs to taxpayers. The House also today welcomed a new member, and that is Suzanne Bonamici of Oregon. She fills the seat left by David Wu, who resigned from Congress last summer. It means there are 434 members of the House now, with the only vacancy, the Arizona 8th, left by Gabrielle Giffords' resignation of just a couple of weeks ago. Also today, off the floor of the House, the Energy and Commerce Committee approved by a 33-20 vote a bill that would shift permitting authority for the Keystone XL pipeline from the State Department to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC. We covered that hearing earlier today, and you can find that in the video library at cspan.org. We'll also have it for you later in our program schedule.
On this vote, the yeas are 187, the nays are 238. The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Accordingly, under the rule, the committee rises.